There's something wrong with the king. In the autumn of 1453, an unsettling murmur began circulating through Westminster Palace. The king, Edmund the Valiant, once known for his robust health and warm laugh, had changed. His once bright eyes were now hollow, his skin a sickly gray, and he'd taken to avoiding the sun, retreating into his chambers where candles barely glowed. Servants refused to enter his rooms alone, and even his most loyal knights began to avoid his company. It started with a visit from a foreign emissary, draped in robes so dark they seemed to absorb the very light from the room. This stranger had spoken to the king in a language no one understood, leaving shortly after a private audience. No one knew what passed between them, but since that night, Edmund's transformation had begun. Soon, a new dread seeped into the halls. By night, strange sounds echoed from the king's chamber. Faint scratching, low mutterings, and sometimes something that resembled laughter. The feasts became disturbingly frequent, lavish spreads of meats and fruits spilling across tables, yet no one was seen leaving the hall afterward. The servants who set up the feasts claimed that, when they returned to clear the tables, everything had been devoured, but they swore they had heard no guests enter. One evening, Sir William Mortimer, one of the king's most trusted knights, decided to find out the truth. Entering the feasting hall under cover of darkness, he expected to see the king and his council. But as he pushed the heavy doors open, he was met only with silence. In the dim torchlight, he saw the king slumped at the head of the table, his head bent low. As Sir William approached, he saw Edmund's face, drained of color, lips pulled back in a fixed, ghastly grin. He wore his crown, but his once vibrant features had sunken into his skull, eyes unfocused and staring. The sight was almost too much to bear, but something compelled Sir William forward. Then, as he stood inches from his king, Edmund's eyes moved, locking onto him. A chill washed over Sir William as Edmund's mouth opened. "You shouldn't have come, Sir William." The words slithered from his mouth, barely above a breath, yet they seemed to come from every corner of the hall. The king's voice, once deep and commanding, was now hollow and twisted, as though another being spoke from within him. Frozen, Sir William watched as the shadows around the king seemed to stretch and move. He realized too late that they were not shadows at all, but figures, skeletal, hollow-eyed, their faces twisted in silent agony as they stared into the void. And then, with unnatural speed, the king rose from his chair, moving towards Sir William with an otherworldly grace. As panic seized him, Sir William turned to flee, but the hall door slammed shut, trapping him within. He backed away, his heart racing as the king's face contorted into an expression of monstrous glee. "Do you fear me, Sir William?" Edmund's voice rasped, though his lips barely moved. His hand, long and bony, reached toward the knight, and in that instant, Sir William saw what had become of his king, a figure no longer human, bound by a darkness that consumed him. The next morning, the guards found Sir William outside the palace walls, his armor scorched black, his face frozen in terror. As winter descended upon the land, more servants and courtiers disappeared without trace. The king's court dwindled, his subjects fled, and England fell under a shadow that refused to lift. By the year's end, the kingdom was empty of its people, save for those too afraid to leave the edges of the palace. They spoke of low mutterings heard at night, of shadows creeping from room to room, of a king who had become something dark and terrible. No one dared enter the palace again, for they all knew something was deeply wrong with the king, and whatever it was hungry.